So we have here a gas blowback rifle that is powered by CO2 or an HPA tank, and at the same time has a mid-cap magazine that has the same concept as your normal AEG. Sounds like to me we found the trifecta. So let's see how E&L does the actual E&L T191 review for this week's episode on Airsoft Master. Hey, what's up guys, and welcome back to another episode of Airsoft Master. And today we're going to be talking about this special beauty is the E&L T191. Basically a replica of the QBZ 191 for the PLA Army. If you don't know what that is, let me just play this right here. Yep, them. So the cool part is let's go ahead and work our way from the front of the rifle work our way to the back, talk about the internals, talk about how this thing actually works. But before we do that, don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and don't forget to comment down below if this is something that you would want to cop, specifically this different type of brand new beauty out there. And let's be real, HPA and GBBRs, hey, this might be a little nice setup. So let's see what's going on. So if you don't know about the QBZ 191, let me give you a little brief story on this one. QBZ 191 is the new prototype concept that's going to be the standard issue rifle for the PLA, specifically the Chinese Army. So if you know about it, its caliber is going to be as a 5.8, and let's be real, this is going to be something that we wanted to see out there, which in reality, even for me, I have to admit, I would like to see a QBZ rifle out there in the airsoft community. We've seen some actual conversion kits, we have seen some other stuff that's out there, but not really an issue line setup. So E&L got us covered with this one, the E&L T191. And I have to admit, it is a very good looking rifle. The only thing is HPA and CO2? Kind of feeling weird about that, but I mean, if it works, it works. Let's find out. But let's go and work our way from the front to the back by talking about, of course, you're going to have is your federally mandated orange tip. But don't worry, as the tip is also full steel, just like most of this gun. And later on, you're going to notice that when we go from there, it is full metal on the barrel, where it's actually also composite of steel. Surprisingly, we work our way from the back of it. We do have is your reinforced nylon handguard, which if you don't have anything on there, it kind of reminds me of the certain style that the AKs would have. But for the actual T191, it's pretty good. It's pretty nice itself, and at the same time, you can basically take off the Picatinny rails that do come with it on the 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and 6 o'clock positions, and keep it nice and sleek. But for example, like what we did here, we put them back on to put attachments such as the flashlight, the actual angle laser system, and a typical red dot that goes all the way through with the truly monolithic rail that we have on top of the PLA 191. But of course, E&L will not leave you hanging, as if you don't have any optics, you'll still have is your front and rear sights, which I have to admit, these things are really stiff for when it comes to these front and rear sights. So it does take a little bit of breaking in, but again, it's really, really nice. And of course, yep, you guessed it, these are also steel as well. Now, we already talked about the rail, and again, it's very simple. But let's talk about the receiver, where most of the stuff that builds this receiver for the actual E&L T191 is a mixture of aluminum and steel, where in fact your body pins, steel, the bolt, steel, your magazine release on the bottom, which is ambidextrous, steel, trigger guard steel, the trigger steel, and of course the selector and the bolt catch is steel. This is a really reinforced gun. And one thing I have to admit, when it comes to standard operations, it does follow the same procedures like a typical AK. When you do have is safe at the beginning, full auto at the 45 position, and semi as the last selector. Basically the same way, but still have that same ambidextrous feel when it comes to a AR selection when being using the QBZ 191 or in reality the E&L T191. But it does keep everything very more ambidextrous friendly, as we do have is the, again, talking about the ambidextrous bottom paddle like you'll see for the magazine release, like a standard AK. Now, when it comes to everything else on the grip, it's actually very comfortable. Again, it's a very familiar type of style, like an AR grip on the back end. So it does help you get very comfortable with it and still be able to keep a very stable stance while aiming down with this rifle. As for the trigger, which we cannot do a trigger pull test because I can't. It just, the way it works with the HPA, it's just more like it doesn't have a reset or anything like that because it needs the actual air coming from the HPA or the CO2 power to help reset the trigger. Now, what I can say though is when testing this out with the air, you do have a very snappy type of trigger pull on here where the wall reset is very, very quick. It's easy to reset and it's very audible. At the same time, it does feel like it's very snappy as if it's a short stroke pull. Now, when it gets to the internals, again, it's very simple to do. To get to it to help actually, when it comes to maintenance or anything else, you push the two pull body pins here, pull them out where it's easily done by hand, pull the whole body, and you get to the recoil guide rod, the recoil spring. And at the same time, you'll end up with is your bolt here that would hold the nozzle return spring and the nozzle itself. One key feature that I have to remind you guys is when disassembling your gun, please do pressurize the actual rifle before disassembling, as it can possibly shoot out with all that compressed air inside the gun. And believe me, the gas efficiency in the tank will hold inside even when you disconnect the tank out of the rifle. So again, pressurize it and then you can disassemble it as well. One key features on the internal that I do have to explain about in the E&L T191 is the simulated bolt on here. Surprisingly, it has a hybrid carbon coating on here to help make it look as realistic as you would to its real predecessor. And alongside that, this is your nozzle with your nozzle return spring being placed right on top to help load the next BB while basically cycling through and giving the compression out there. I do have to forewarn in regards of the chamber though, is because of the nozzle spring basically being a little bit too long, it does have an issue where the bolt won't seat all the way through, which does cause the compression issues. So in my recommendation, I would say try to cut one coil per time to see if you can actually fix your adjustment on here. The most I've ever seen done is about 4 coils on here to help with compression and also loading the BB. Now, one little gripe I do have with the T191 is putting the gun back together after it's broken apart like this. In fact, I've been messing around with it for about an hour or so, just trying to figure this out and making sure if there was an easier way to put it together. Good news is I did figure something out while doing that, is dealing with the actual guide rod from the lower part of the receiver. What we're going to do is put everything back on the lower first and then put the upper rod on top. Starting off with is the actual recoil spring, and what we're going to do is we're going to compress that recoil spring with our main group of the nozzle and the bolt going in to protrude out and seat in as such. Now that we already have that going, we can always hold on the side charging handle and bring our upper and just slide everything in. Now, I do have to also remind you guys is you do have guide rails here that is housed into the bolt. You want to line the upper onto the bolt and then also the back end of the bolt end here to line up the body. So what we do is we're going to have that going in, line it up. Again, push that through, and we want to line up the body into the bolt and the rails. All right, let's keep going. Now for the back end, same thing. Boom. It's nice and flush. Push the body pin back. Then I can release the bolt. There we go. It takes some time, but again, it's possible, and it's a lot easier to do than trying to put the bolt back in and trying to line it up with the recoil guide on the actual top of the bolt. You end up missing it, so it's like a big cluster. I'd rather just do it this way, where it's somewhat faster, at the same time a lot easier to put things back together and get the gun up and ready and functional. So there you go. Now when you notice when I broke down the rifle, you did notice that we didn't have a Hpa. Well, it was actually in the lower, where it's a rotary style in the end of it towards the mag well, right in front of the hop up chamber. And to basically increase your hop, all you would have to do is just tilt it to the right side to increase, or decrease as you go to the opposite direction for whatever weight BB you want to use. What's interesting is it still has a nice audible click to help fine tune to whatever weight size BB you want to use inside your T191. Now that we already talked about the internals and everything else, let's go ahead and talk about the stock. So the stock you do have is a retractable system in the back end where it's very, very stiff. Where you still have is basically like a 5 to 6 positional stock. And again, you can fine tune it by just basically going in between to find your proper size. Again, it's a very nice, I do like how it's still kind of a fixed style in that aspect in the back, very slim. And at the same time, you can collapse it to your own length. What's interesting is in the back end of the stock, in case you don't want to use HPA, you're able to swap it out by using a 33-gram CO2 in the back end as your main source of power for the gas blowback rifle. But say for example, if you didn't have a CO2, which I brought up the HPA line. Well, the HPA line is right actually in the grip, where once we slide it off, right here, it reveals the male connection right inside to connect to your hose. Now do be careful about what using different types of regulators, as again, the higher pressure can cause damage into the rifle. So again, be careful of what you're using. And of course, the most main important thing is read the manual, which is very important on this type of special build. Now, of course, we're on to part of the video where we would expect to talk about is magazine compatibility. Well, I'm gonna make it really short and say, unfortunately, the T191 is basically proprietary with its own in-house mags. Reason why is it has its own catch locking mechanism to help stop the actual BBs from loading in when it comes to its empty out, and basically stop it from dry firing the gun. What's interesting is you still have is basically a 100-round magazine in capacity from here to load up into the GBBR. Again, pretty nice and very interesting in comparison to the difference of the other AKs or other variations that you'll see out there. Now when it comes to gas efficiency on per the magazine to the source of power system, HPA, it still does a pretty good job, as you do have a plethora amount, specifically if you have it for, say, the normal 4,000 to 3,000 rounds in PSI inside your actual HPA tech. But for when it comes to 33 grams, it would only do about 75% of the magazine fill. So again, be mindful of when you're using whatever type of source of power you have in here. I'm using 0.20 gram BBs and a HPA line regulated. Speaking of which, about power, when we did chrono this gun, on average from multiple variations of the consistency, we're looking from around the 420 FPS to even at sometimes a crazy amount of being the 500, depending on using the HPA lineup. or even the 33 gram CO2. Again, it fluctuates in between. Now, there is a trick when it comes to reducing the FPS on here for your T191, which is using a small little O-ring on the back end where the actual nozzle would be when it comes to the reservoir for the HPA. If you do it that way, you're able to actually reduce the FPS and make it somewhat a field legal gun for more of the outdoors and sometimes maybe indoors, depending on how much PSI pressure is on there. So when you do purchase the E&L T191, it comes in this nice box where inside is a red ribbon that says legendary is perfection, which I have to admit, I do have to agree with their actual work on this thing. But other than that, you're going to have is the rifle with the included magazine inside with spare parts to help replace the O-rings or the springs just in case if something breaks or goes missing. As well to that, you do have is your 2 Allen keys to help install either your Picatinny rail segments or even just getting to the back end of the stock to install your 33 gram CO2s if you want to use that instead of the HPA power source. So overall, what do I think about the E&L T191? For realism, I gotta give it credit. It is pretty nice where it's very hefty and comes to weight on the actual QBZ 191. And for accuracy, it does a really good job other than being short stroke because while the reservoir is in the back end, they still need to find a way to basically have it cycle through, which again, it's more of a short stroke using the recoil guide in the back end of the receiver. But it still does its job of basically replicating like a QBZ 191. In regards of the gas efficiency, again, I will have to give it credit for the innovation by having a nice different types of source of powers that it can be used, such as the CO2 or even HPA lines that you can use on this gas blowback rifle. As per tactile on its actual hop-up chamber, the selector, it's very nice overall. The only thing I will have to say is the way how you assemble the rifle is a little bit tricky, but it just takes a little bit of time and practice. And for a really good looking PLA rifle, this would probably be on one of the good collections I would want to cop myself. But what do you guys think about the actual E&L T191? Is this something that you would want to also cop up as well? And again, comment down below, what do you guys think about it? But if you're looking for products like these, check it out at airsoftbastard.com. But for this episode, my name's Mike. I'll see you until next time.
This video is brought to you by Airsoft Master.